it's going really well. We've even developed a whole an internship program that's going great. Southern California community colleges. It's looking really good. And I guess give you a little background on myself. I've been in this area. I grew up around San Diego, and I've been focused on organic gardening techniques for a long time, since I was 5. And so I've taken a lot of schooling in the area, and it was all really based on chemicals and on ornamentals. And I've been trying to get some type of ag in our school system, our junior college system, for a long time, and there's been this huge resistance. And it's slowly starting to happen. The other colleges are kind of taking note that our classes are just bursting at the seams, and their classes are dwindling. And so it sounds like they're possibly interested in taking on some food growing or organic aspects. So, and there was a lot of resistance. So we'll see how that starts to come along. You know, we live in a desert, and we see kind of like this illusion every day around you know, where we live, where the way we use water and grow lawns and tropicals and just lush vegetation. And it really is this like, you know, this fantasy world that we've created from having cheap piped in water for a long time. For many decades we've had really cheap water. So we could just, and it also a good economy, so people could just kind of afford all these luxuries and take all this really high quality drinking water and just pour it out on the ground and flush it down the toilet. And they're really starting to wake up to the fact that this is all imported water. We get 2% of the water that's used here that comes out of the sky. The other 92% comes from somewhere else. It may not come from very far. Most of it comes from the Colorado River, but we get other water sources that aren't really that far, but they're still piped in. It doesn't come out of the sky, and it's not naturally here. So people are really starting to conserve water, and that also has a problem too. So the idea of conserving water is really starting to sink in. And so a lot of people, they're conserving so much now that the water companies aren't making a profit, and they can't pay their bills. So what do you think they do? They raise our rates. So the more we save, the more they're going to charge us. And it's just crazy. So, and it's because of this broken system that we've had from day one, and they just haven't. They should have conditioned us to save water and be reasonable with water from day one, but that didn't happen. But so here we are now. So there's ways that people grew food with using the rainwater, and that's the way people used to do it. And it's kind of been mostly forgotten. When I grew up in Escondido, in front of my house there was an oat field that every year the farmer planted oats, and it was like magic. He planted oats at a certain time and came up, you know, it was like all desolate, dry stubble that he would mow off and leave there. And some weeds would grow, mustards, tumbleweeds, lots of different things would grow, and it would even bloom throughout the year. Not the most attractive, but there was life out there in that dry soil and in that dry field during the times that there was no rain and in the off season. But he would just let it kind of grow almost like a cover crop naturally, and it was interesting to see, and it created some habitat. It was acres and acres. And then all of a sudden, magically, he would come along and he would turn the soil over, and it was dry, and it would be dusty, and then he'd wait a little while, and then he'd run another machine over to break up the clods, and all that plant debris got turned into the soil. And then at a certain time, I'd see him out there with a tractor planting the seed. How does he know the right time to plant the seed? Because I know he doesn't put irrigation out there. And then the seeds would all grow.
And most of the time it would get 3, 4 feet tall. Sometimes it only get about 18 inches tall, and then it would go to seed. So you know, when I was a kid, I observed it. I thought, wow, you know, this year, you know, you can't see over it. Other years, it's, you know, you can see right across it. Other years, there'd be dead patches because it just didn't. But most of the time, it was about 3 feet tall. And I just thought that was amazing. How did he just know? You know, the farmer's almanac? I don't know. But he knew it was tradition, and people used to do this all the time. You can tell me. So this is a patch of some stuff that just came up at the urban farm, and all just came up from the rains. We just threw the seeds in places, and you know, like wildflowers come up just from the rain. They're, you know, no one had to really like turn them into the soil or really do anything. They just come up with the rain. You can go to the next one. You know, this is the way, you know, people used to do it. Then came the cheap water in the pipe, and then we started doing it a whole different way, and that tradition got just lost and forgotten. And who needs it? Because we can grow anything we want at any time. So timing wasn't like a factor, and appropriate plants, it doesn't matter. We have the water. We'll just grow whatever we feel like, as long as it won't freeze. You know, there's just a few little parameters. We'll go to the next one. Well, just the thought of dry farming really, you know, if you think about dry farming, it really isn't exactly what you would think. Well, next one. It's actually a misnomer. You know, life won't exist without moisture anywhere on the planet. You've got to have some moisture content somewhere, or you're not going to have any life or much life in that spot. So you've got to have some moisture. Next one. I guess to define it, this is kind of, if you look up like definitions for it, it's a profitable production of some useful crops. So that could be fiber, you know, it could be paper, it could be food, medicine crops, things like that. So it's not just food. It could be crops that might be grown to feed animals too. And typically dry farming, and there's actually a number of other, you know, words they use for this type of growing food, but dry farming tends to be the most universal. And most of the time it's in places where they get like 20 inches of rain or less. Do people know about how many inches of rain we get here?
About 11, between 10 and 11.
10 and 11. Would that be arid? So, next one. How many, this is just for comparison. So we think of, you know, Southern California as a, you know, it's kind of green, and even our hills have greenery on them, you know, and some shrubbery and stuff like that. Then when it does rain, you know, we get some growth. So it definitely looks like spring. How many inches of rain do you think Phoenix, Arizona gets?
22.
Less?
No, more.
More?
I think they get more. They have monsoon.
We get like 22 inches of rain. So we're basically more of a desert than the desert. So, want to go to the next one?
22.
Next one. So it's just kind of like this reality check where, you know, how much rain that we really do get or don't get. But there is some things about the rain we get that we can predict. We get it all in about a month, most of the time, except this year. It's like we're just getting this phenomenal, you know, sets of rain. So here's the question: Can we really do dry farming here? And everything like that has to do with nature or gardening and stuff. I always preface it. Well, that depends, you know, on a number of factors. And with this situation, you know, we do get rain. We need to really understand when we get it and how much we get, obviously, and I say? How much rain and when, right? So, and then we really need these two factors to really give us a good indication of what we can do from that point. So, next one, please. What if those were just magically replaced with barley, or oats, or amaranth, or quinoa, or whatever it is? You know, there's really no reason why those plants, if they were put in that same place at the right time, there's no reason why they couldn't be really productive and grow food with basically just, you know, it wouldn't be that it would be that easy. Nothing that's really worth it is really that easy, but it would take some work to basically kind of make a shift from what's existing there, those weeds, and to some crops, and also someone have to you know, provide the seed for that too. So next slide. So, I wish you could see that. That's all green. There's an oak tree. It's all this green fields, like in Ramona, and it's just, you know, it's basically wild grasses, some native, lots of them non-native, which, you know, most of the grains are non-natives, and if we were to basically give them the advantage over some weeds, we could have some highly productive grain crops. This is just one little sector of the plants we can grow. So because personally I don't think we should all live on grains, but that's the next slide. So a couple of the parameters about dry farming, and not a lot of people are doing this. Just here and there you'll find people. Some people are doing it and they don't know they're doing it, and some people are doing it on an accident. But it is happening. But a lot of people aren't really putting a lot of conscious effort into doing it. But if you were to, you know, really focus on the parameters of how this could work, you could really get a lot to grow. And so timing is like real huge, and matching the crop to the rainfall. So we need to understand how much rainfall certain plants really need, or how much moisture they really need. And a lot of them are really forgiving. They'll take tons and produce good, or they'll take very little and produce okay, or somewhere in the middle. Nothing's really black and white. So you could get a lot of that done. And a good example is the wildflowers. On a really good year, they're 2 and 3 feet tall, and they have huge heads of blooms on them. On a really bad year, they don't bloom at all, but the seeds are still there. It's a seed bank. They're just sitting there, and they'll sit there for decades and be okay and viable. On a not so good year, you'll see wildflowers come up, and they're 1 inch tall, 1 inch tall. With each one will grow this little tiny dwarfed flower on top, and it'll grow 1 seed capsule and spread its seeds. Wow. So they'll just do what they need to do to spread their seeds. So it wouldn't be that great if our crops did that, but you might find some.
I'm really angry about you moving it without telling anybody. I just spent half an hour walking from here down to there to find out it's back here.
Exercise is good though.
All right. And depends on your crop, and also depends on a number of other factors too. Are you going to supplement water? Yeah. So it really depends on your crop. So like I said, there's not a lot of people doing this here, and so what is the timing? Well, we get our rains starting in basically you can kind of count on rains in late January on something that's going to germinate crops in late January, and typically February 15th is when we're going to normally see a pretty good germination of things, so 2 weeks later. So late January through the middle of February is when we get the majority of a good soaking rain. but you know, that's would be the you know, when you're trying to predict rain, very often one thing that does happen is farmers will prepare the fields, put the seed in, and then cross their fingers. But the thing is that the seed, when they put it in, it can be there for a long time. It can be sitting there basically as a seed bank that as a human put in place instead of nature dropping the seeds. So, and they can do it months ahead of time, and you'll see that as you, the more I study this, the more I find that some cultures will actually harvest their seed and then leave a lot in place for next year. They just leave it in place. So basically, they're the seed dispersal agent, you know, for next year's crop, and they actually leave it right in place. So they don't take it away. They do cover it. So, so timing is interesting. You know? So that's kind of one of the, that's why it's right there. It's one of the main factors is timing. Also deciding what crop you're going to use for your, you know, that you're going to farm, and you have to, you know, decide if it's a crop that needs a lot of water, then it's probably not an appropriate crop here. If it's historically been used as a dry farm crop, then you should kind of stick in there. Matching the crop. Harvesting, you know, another part of this equation is that we want to harvest the rainwater, and that's the only free water we get. This comes out of the sky, and right now we can still have that water for free right now. Believe it or not, it's not free everywhere. Some places they don't want you to save that water. They want to regulate the water you save that falls out of the sky. Wow. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the rain that falls out of the sky, if it was on really sandy soil, it's going to shoot right to the sand, and we really couldn't grow anything. So we want to build the soil so it'll retain the moisture. So it's and that's the true fertility of soil. It's not really a nutrient factor. It's that you're going to build fertility. It has to do with life. It's going to breathe life into the soil, and that has to do with organic matter, and it has to do with the ability of the soil to retain the moisture for a long time. So we want to save the water in the soil. And also you want to, if you're going to grow something, are you going to do some supplemental watering too? Or can you do it? And so, you know, a lot of this isn't really black and white, so that's why I'd like to throw in the idea of supplemental watering. Next one, please. So that's actually just like one of the first pictures of some Hopi corn. A lot of the natives of the Southwest, they did real farming. It wasn't like what's called proto-farming. Here in San Diego County, there was something that they kind of considered proto-farming, which is kind of early stage of the farm where they were just, they would manage things, but they wouldn't really like turn soil and plant seeds in rows and things like that. But they would, you know, burn grasslands, and they would, to keep shrubs and new trees down, and they would also spread lots of seeds and move them around. So, but that was kind of their type of farming that went on here. But in other areas, they, especially in New Mexico, Arizona, they did a lot of real traditional farming, and they developed varieties and things like that. Anasazi Indians, and lots of legumes and lots of grasses and squashes and peppers and things like that. Done for a long, long time, especially by their all kinds of cultures do this. They can live in really arid lands, and they can improve the soil and manage the rainwater that they get by all kinds of means. And this book, which is right here, really goes over it in really good detail, illustrated really well, and it's not only is it really effective, it's really beautiful too. It's a really neat way to help manage your
the rain that we do get, which we actually get a lot. We just have to work on managing it, so we move it around our properties, and we also try to keep it on the property, so we let it soak in. And I would highly recommend taking some workshops on that, or talks on it, or get a good look through one of these books. I'm real sure you could get them out of the library. Brand Lancaster, he was here just a couple months ago giving a talk to, so he's always doing book tours. But you'll find these terms like earthworks, land contouring, berms, basins, swales, and his kind of main principles are slow, spread, and sink. So you want to slow the water down, you want to spread it as thin as you can, and encourage it to sink into the soil. And then that's where you want to store the water. There's an old saying, it's the best place to store water is in the soil, not really in a tank or a pond, because now you have to manage that body of water. It's a lot better to have it just in the soil and stored there, which a good fertile soil will store a lot of water, and you get many months of free water, irrigation water, if you store it in the soil. Next one, please. So you see, so these are like sunken basins around trees. And this is in an area, obviously, sure, that has very loose, sandy soil, and or a loose, loamy soil. If we were to do these types of techniques on really heavy clay soil, those basins are going to just have standing water, and you're going to get these ponds of water that will end up drowning the roots of trees. So these techniques have to be, you have to think about what you're doing. You can't really just say, well, I'm going to put the sunken basins around all my fruit trees, and you have really heavy clay soil on your property. So that won't quite work. You need to make some adjustments to it. You have to think about, can I really drain away? Do I have a spot for the excess water to go? So you do have to, it's not cut and dry. So you have to understand what type of soil you have to. But this is interesting, they'll have a street here, and there's what are called curb cuts. You see that this is normally the water be running down the street, along the gutter, and then there's a curb cut. So a little bit of water keeps getting delivered to these sunken basins that are on the parkway strips along streets. And some people think, well, I don't want that dirty water in there. But actually, where else would that water off the street or parking lot or driveway go? It would all go to the ocean. And when it does run off our rooftops or parking lots, all these places that we know have been for about 6-9 months or so collecting some pollution, just drops out of the air, drips out of a car. Now it's all being commingled, and we're directing it all to the ocean. We're trying to get rid of it all because we're looking at that water as a nuisance, as a hazard. Let's just get rid of that water, all that rainwater, and all the stuff that might be in it. And then it gets into the ocean, and it's the biggest part of our what's called an intertidal pollution. It comes from urban runoff, and it's chemical fertilizers, a lot of dog feces. It's really gross, but the land can actually handle it if it's delivered to the soil in small quantities, and then biology will break it down and allow it to either leach properly or, it's a biofilter. All of our soil, you could look at it that way. So instead of it all being concentrated, ended up in the ocean, it could be all handled in soil, and it's just better for overall for the environment. So they allow some to go in these sunken basins. All the walkways are a little higher and they're crested, so the water goes in there. The water off the roofs is directed to stay on the property instead of we looking at it as something we want to get rid of. It's something we should keep. That's one of the problems in our cities. We've sealed the land, so all the water that drops on the buildings and everything, it now doesn't get into the aquifers. It doesn't recharge the groundwater. It just is very quickly gotten rid of into the ocean. that's the other factor we should really pay attention to. We should just get all the water that drops out of the sky to soak into our land and not run off. That's what we do. So we want to store the water. And the way to store the water is that we have to create a living sponge, like what I have on the bottom there. And it's thinking of soil as a living, breathing system, much like the ocean. You know, it's just teeming with life. And I think this has been something that's been omitted in our schooling. You know, we haven't really been taught that soil is where all of our food comes from. It's like plants grow in the dirt, and the nutrients are in the plants, but really they were in the soil originally. And they got there because of microorganisms, which is basically like the plankton that's in the ocean. We know the cornerstone to life in the ocean is the plankton, the tiniest thing, are the building blocks of everything. Same with the soil. It's like it's basically like a solid ocean. And all that microorganisms activity, biology, will break things down and create humus. Humus is organic matter that has been broken down as far as it possibly can. It very much resists decay, and it's like microscopic sponges. And so the more plants we grow, the more composting we do, and the more mulching we do, the more organic matter we'll have in the soil. And we almost can't put too much organic matter in the soil. The more organic matter we put in the soil, the more carbon we'll sequester too. So the more organic matter that's in the soil, the less carbon dioxide is in our air, which is better. So it's trying to get our soil to be a very a type of soil that will retain the moisture a long time. So there we grow and just let the rain do it. And really nice purple buffalo barley, and just grew up really pretty. And we're collecting it, and we're experimenting with a lot of dry farming techniques over at City College. Next, please. So it's really surprising. There's a lot that people traditionally dry farm. A lot of grapes for wines are dry farmed in places where there's not a lot of moisture. And they've been done that way for hundreds of years. Worn. And when you see that the symbol on the back says warm or cool, so that it's cool season or warm season. So it gives you kind of an indication when you might, when these would actively grow. So corn, they normally would plant it as the spring rains would come, and you wouldn't want to plant it really early, in January or February, in case you're going to get some frost. So you have to think about hardiness or tenderness of plants too. But a number of them, like the cool season, wheat, barley, oats, alfalfa, they'll grow and germinate and do really well in the cool season.
Does that fourth line say tomatoes?
Tomatoes. Tomatoes are dry farmed a lot. There's certain varieties that do really, really good. And they have some really interesting ways of dry farming tomatoes. They'll grow tomato starts ahead of time in like their own nursery, or often farms will create a growing area for baby starts. And these starts for tomatoes will be grown in a little bit less shade than they normally want. So they really get leggy. They really get tall and leggy. And they keep trimming off the side leaves and side branches. So they just have one single head. And they'll get them to grow 2 to 3 feet tall with this little skinny stem, often put on a small bamboo stake. And then as the ground starts to warm up, and they know that the certain spring rains are coming, they'll be planted in a spot. And this is done a lot in rural parts of Africa. And there's not a lot of organic matter, not a lot of compost, but there is some plant debris that they can rake up, and there's manures of different animals that they can get. And they'll dig these columnar pits, like a post hole in the ground, 2 to 3 feet deep.
they will put some really good finished compost in the bottom of that and lower this plant, this tomato plant, down into the hole. And now the tomatoes have the ability to side root. It's called adventitious rooting, and they can root out the sides of their stem. So now you've, in essence, very deeply planted this plant right off the bat. Its active feeder roots are down at the bottom of this, where there's already moisture there. And then they backfill with some really good nutritious material that they have around. And they put it in a really large basin that slopes to the plant. And they'll put a berm around the outside, and then they'll put a bunch of thorny branches around the whole thing to keep predators from coming in. And even elephants won't step on acacia thorns that are 6 for really hot climates. Figs, jujubes, which are they're probably at the top. They'll take after they're established, the least amount of water. And then there's some surprising ones that you wouldn't expect to be very drought tolerant. Cherimoyas are just strange. They're kind of tropical, but they really like our climate here, and they'll take very little water after they're established.
Like, I have a
Good-sized tree.
cherimoya, so how little is little? I'm curious. It's established in fruiting, like less than once a month?
So is it 5 years old, 10 years old?
It's at least 10 years old because I moved in and it was there.
And that there's a number of factors that it would depend on. So if it was in a lawn or in a shallow watered area, then all of its roots are 6 inches down. So you couldn't pull water from it. But if it's in a garden that was watered deeply, then the plants are going to tell you how little water you can do. But if it was something you grew from the beginning and you purposely deep watered it, and you were familiar with your soil too, you're gonna then, and for the sole purpose of starting to cut back on its watering, that's a whole other thing. So if it's already there, it was an abandoned house and it's doing great, what do you think? Because you'll see many of these like in a home that's an abandoned home, but that fig tree just grows like crazy every year. And a number of these there'll be examples that way. So, yeah. Did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna say you could put sapote on that list.
Thank you. Yeah, sapote is really good for that too. It's right up there. Guavas, pomegranates.
All kinds of guavas, or just vanilla siciliana?
No, kind of the true guavas. Pineapple guavas do okay, strawberry guavas okay, but the true Mexican guavas, which there's about 1,000 types, most of those after they're established are really can resist drought pretty well. Fruiting cactus. So I wrote fruiting cactus. So we all know about prickly pears. And they will do great, but there's a number of other types of fruiting cactus. There's candelabra cactus, a whole bunch of them. That pitaya, which is that dragon fruit. It is a tropical climbing cactus, but after it's established, it surprisingly will take very little water and still produce really well, even though it is a tropical cactus.
What about nut trees? Are there any nut trees that are more drought tolerant than others?
I've seen really old pecan trees, but I'm sure they were watered a long time, probably 20, 30 years, and then kind of stopped. So I don't know how I would categorize them. Most nut trees kind of live along riparian areas, kind of naturally, but I don't know if I would categorize them as taking less water. Apricots tend to, for things in the stone fruit group, like peaches and things like that, apricots tend to be more drought tolerant. All the others need a little more. Next slide, please. There's a few more. So these are fava beans, chickpeas, and lentils. Are easy to grow if you just know when to grow them. In the cool season, that's when they like to grow. And if they're soaked ahead of time and watered a little bit, and then let the rain do the rest, they're surprisingly productive. And then you just let them dry on the vine as the warm season comes along and the ground dries up. You let the vines dry. The pods, they're a domesticated plant, so they're not prone to just popping open and throwing the seeds, the pods will stay shut. So you can go and just pull the whole plant up, the pod stays on, and then you collect the beans. They can all be collected when they're fresh green beans too.
Pretty tasty.
Really good.
Hey,
Fava
Paul,
beans are.
I also had really good luck with lab beans last summer. They were, I mean, amazing.
Was it the green leaf one or the purple leaf one?
Green.
Okay. Yeah, there's a
Lab.
bean called lab, and there's some ornamental varieties, and then there's some edible ones called lab, and they're known for being really efficient with water.
And
I
they're warm.
haven't grown.
I grew it in the warm season, and if anybody wants to meet up with me afterwards, I can give you some seeds. I don't have them on me, but I'll give you my next time.
There are a number of days. Often they'll use some straw or some kind of very light mulch, not very thick, to go over the top of your seeds. Yeah.
But that, what you're talking about is pre-emergent control of weeds with a flamethrower, where you can do it like carrots, which are really long time before they germinate. So you can actually sow the carrots. It's not a dry farming technique necessarily, because carrots aren't really so much of that here. But then the weeds all germinate before the carrots, and then you flamethrow, and that knocks all those weeds down, and then the carrots come charging up in this clean bed. You know. So yeah, it's definitely another great use of a flamethrower. I recommend everyone get one. We're gonna need them.
Have you done that? Because I'd be worried about scorching the carrots.
Yeah, it's a timing thing. It's just about knowing. So it can be 7 to 15 days before a carrot comes up. So you just have to kind of get in tune with the weather and what it's going to do. You know your soil and start. Yeah, it just takes time to learn when. You kind of get gut feelings about when seeds are going to come up based on the way the weather has been. So yeah, it's definitely a concern.
Other things, well, there are sesame seeds. People probably never seen sesame seeds growing. They're really well known to grow in super dry climates. Sunflowers are really easy to grow. The birds will drop them everywhere. They'll just show you they're easy to grow. Potatoes in the cool season, it's surprising. With very little added water, you can grow a lot of potatoes. They will do fine, especially our climate where it doesn't get really cold. They'll be very actively growing in the cool season. Next slide, please. So, kind of key strategies for dry farming. So, I know we talked about getting the soil to hold the moisture, but mulching to keep the moisture in the ground is really a key thing, especially if it's a really dry area. A lot of people have never heard the term soil mulch. See on the end there? The soil mulch is what a lot of dry farmers do, where they actually just they'll cultivate the soil 1 or 2 inches down, and it creates this crumble on top of the soil. And you think, well, that's not going to do anything. Well, what happens now is you've got moist soil below, you've got this crumbled soil on top, and it now breaks the capillary action. So now the moisture that's in below can't just keep traveling up. There's all these air pockets. So you're going to lose a lot less moisture, and they just crumble it. It's really amazing. And so you don't really have to bring something in. You can just loosen the soil, which sounds really odd, but it does need to be 1 inch or so, 1 to 2 inches in the ground. So it's called soil mulch. And you actually call it. It actually still does the same thing with mulch. Plant spacing is a huge thing in my book about nutrients and water competition. This book here, this gentleman Steve Solomon, that's one of his things he really wants to point out, is that we're kind of taught to put plants too close together. And most books will tell you, really cram them together. If your soil is super rich, and if you have tons of moisture, then yeah, you can put them close together. But if the resources are scarce, we shouldn't have our plants so smashed together. They really, even though they're the same plants, they stress. They're truly in competition with each other. So you can do super wide spacings. You'll see some amazing things, where things are just really, really broad and they do much, much better. So spacing is a biggie. Appropriate varietal selection. So, if you go through seed catalogs, you'll see the ones that are noted for really good drought conditions. Others that aren't. Others that are really big, luscious fruits, and most of the time they've been grown for characteristics like flavor and color and size and things like that. But not many have been done for drought resistance. But there are many that are. So you need to kind of search them out, and they're there. They'll talk about it. Planting method: direct sowing, and seed depth, and special